The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is Wednesday, Lunch and Learn, and the 29th of April. We're just a day away from being into May, and hopefully all of you are getting a little bit of time to spend outside, just getting some fresh air, enjoying spring, and pretending like life is normal. Today, Richard's going to be talking about the multivariate coherence training. This is a new feature that has been built into the NewMind software. And so we're going to record this. Everybody is on mute. Once he is done, he'll unmute folks, and then we'll take questions. So Richard,
Okay, thank you, Rob.
you betcha.
Okay, can you see my screen just to make sure it's visible?
Yep. At 4-channel multivariate coherence training.
That
Sounds
is,
like an article by Coburn.
yeah, that's the official name of it. That's correct. And I saw Rob several years ago do a presentation. I think it was at ISNR, um, and was really interested in what work he was doing. And one thing you have to know about Rob Coburn is not only a really good clinician, but he's one of our best researchers in our field. He really knows how to do research properly. He does it well, and he publishes in peer-reviewed journals. So he's somebody that we're really happy to have in our field. It's not often you have somebody who's not only really good at research, but also, a good clinician. That's a great but rare combo. And he has spearheaded work on autistic kids for, a decade and a half in this field, since maybe since the early 2000s, I think, and has had great success and published multiple articles. You can go to his website and he's got them all up there. He's got 8 or 9 articles. It's really good stuff. And I was very impressed because he really understands the neuroimaging research well. And he was looking at things like effective connectivity when nobody in our field had a clue what that was. And I was out there trying to explain it. And I just got blank faces. Um, but um, so he has a good grasp, cross-disciplinary in terms of what's going on in neuroimaging, what's going on in neuroscience, what's going on in psychology, and what's going on in counseling. And he recently published this article, which is kind of a summation of his work to date on coherence training. And he's come up with this thing called 4-channel multivariate coherence training. And he has um, really found it highly effective. And so if you want to know more about this topic, there is he came to our Lunch and Learn and did a presentation on it, and it's up there on the NewMind YouTube channel, so you can hear his basic presentation on it. If you want to dig deeper into it, you can read his paper. It's pretty available. It's the Frontiers of Neuroscience. It's open access. Anybody can get it. And it's a little dense in parts, but it's very good. And I've been to several of his lectures since then, and he continues to really impress me as just doing a terrific job clinically with this. So I want to get into this a little bit more and show you how we've adapted it for our system, because the minute he developed it, Rob did not go say, okay, well, I have a proprietary protocol and I'll never explain to you how it's done, and it's secretly hiding in the software, and if you give me your firstborn child, then I will let you use this protocol in your clinic. He made it available to the public like a true scientist. So that's pretty darn cool, I think. And so what we did is we read his research, and it's explained in there clearly, and we adapted it to the NewMind system. Now, it's not exactly the way Rob does it, but it's because he does it on EEG or equipment, but it's basically the same. And we hope you all, if you have time at some point, to really, take a look at it, give it a try on your tough clients. Now, this is not something that we expect you to run out and do with everybody. It's not a new toy. It's like the proportional training we talked about last week. It's something additional you can do with difficult clients or for particular reasons. And so I have done a whole presentation on coherence training and a little bit of its history and what the basic rules are. And you can go up there and watch that presentation on proportional training on the New Mind YouTube channel as well. So watch Coburn's, watch mine, and you'll get a sense of what we've been doing in neurofeedback, what Coburn has been doing differently, and then you'll even be able to watch this one on how we've implemented it in our software. So hopefully that'll be enough to get you where you want to go, and then you can get the article from Frontiers in Neuroscience and really drill down if you want to know all the details. Okay, this is 4-channel multivariate coherence training. Coburn characterizes it as a new form of neurofeedback that uses 4 channels of EEG with a multivariate calculation of coherence metrics. Comparing this form of multivariate coherence neurofeedback to more standard 2-channel coherence training, research by Coburn found that there was a significant difference between groups doing 4-channel multivariate coherence training and groups doing standard 2-channel coherence training, leading to greater changes in EEG metrics. So there many of the other vendors out there, Thought Tech and Brainmaster and Stens Corporation, Nexus, I mean, they offer coherence training. I mean, they've all gotten on board over the years with it. But a lot of people don't use it or use it sparingly because it's tricky, can have side effects. If you're doing it with Z-score, it's a little safer in terms of side effects. And if you're doing it with Z-score with magnitude training and in addition to anything else in addition, it's much more safe to apply. And we've learned that talking to all the clinicians and doing it ourselves over the years. I think that Mark Smith was really the first person to use coherence training with Brainmaster, the Z-score training that Brainmaster invented and put out there. Mark really jumped in and used it, and we used it too, and we really did get less side effects training with coherence and adding in magnitude. So that was kind of nice to see. Wasn't greatly impressed by the results, but here we have Coburn comparing those kinds of trainings with what he's doing and finding it significantly more effective. Now, this will probably continue to be controversial, and all the different vendors will say, well, wait a second, ours is really just as good, and you overlooked this, and so forth. So that's part of just scientific research and so forth. As clinicians, you just want to know, hey, give me the system and let me try it myself and see if it's working. And so that's kind of what we've done. Compared to 2-channel coherence training, 4-channel multivariate coherence neurofeedback led to a greater than 50% change in power and 400% change in coherence values per session, according to Coburn's research. So that's quite an impressive claim, and he's got data to back it up. Now remember, this is one piece of research, and in the field of science, you need to replicate things and other people need to replicate them to really be valid and reliable. But when it's really well done and it's based on prior research and it's an innovation on prior research, that's kind of a replication. And so it's pretty impressive. Previous coherence training research is important to look at. A 2-channel coherence training was previously implemented with demonstrated efficacy. And here are the authors who can attest to that. Coburn and Myers in 2010 have shown this approach to have greater efficacy than single-channel training. So Coburn, about 10 years ago, felt that the coherence training was more effective. 2-channel was more effective than single-channel training. Now he's talking about traditional beta up, theta down, or SMR up, and theta down, or things like that. And you'd have to read the actual research to see the specific protocols. You couldn't say that it was better than single channel training in general, but you could say it's better than the single channel training that they used. So you'd have to look at that protocol and see which protocol it was better than in terms of single channel. And that's very promising and it's exciting. In 2007, Coburn had utilized two-channel neurofeedback in the treatment of 37 children diagnosed with ASD to significantly decrease their symptoms by 40% in 20 sessions. And that's very good too. So this is very promising, well-documented research. Now, I did not compare it to two-channel training or the type of two-channel training we're doing, so I don't know if it's better or worse. And that will be the decision you make trying it clinically on your most difficult clients. So if you have a client and you're not making much progress with standard new mind protocols, and they have a lot of coherence problems, then this might be something that you'd want to try and see if you can move the ball farther down the court. And if you do, we hope you'll bring that case to the Lunch and Learn and let us know. And the more of these we collect, we can let Rob know, say, hey, Rob, we're doing this, we're finding this true too, or no, Rob, or we're not finding that's true particularly. And he would appreciate that input as well. So two-channel coherence training was shown in 2015 randomized controlled trial to improve the reading scores of children when compared to children who attended traditional resource room style reading programs. So here's another one. The experimental group on average improved the reading scores by 1.2 grade levels in 10 weeks. So as good as two-channel coherence was, and it was effective, better than some one-channel, better than other approaches and programs, and but not as good as this four-channel. Now, in the past, Joe Horvath, who's unfortunately passed, really was kind of one of the leading people reporting and doing coherence training, and Rob had implemented a lot of his protocols years back. I think as far back as, was it 2010, 2011 or something, Rob? But and experimented with it quite extensively, and found pretty much what Joe had found based on what I understand.
Right.
Okay, yeah. So
Agree.
good. So we have, and he presented that on Lunch and Learns many times. Now, what Joe found was that it was really good for reducing delta coherence. He never up-trained delta coherence. And then he would always start with delta if it was out. And then the next thing he would do would be to reduce theta coherence if it was out. And then finally, if he felt he still wasn't making enough progress symptomologically, he would go and try to reduce beta coherence. But he usually found that by the time he reduced theta coherence, that symptoms had significantly reduced. He did increase beta coherence if necessary, so he would up-train beta coherence if necessary. So these are rules that you might want to consider when you're doing Coburn's protocol, just to be conservative, because this has been kind of sorted out and Rob kind of confirmed it. Now, Horvath did amplitude training after he did coherence training, but in his peer-reviewed chapter on the topic in the Handbook of Neurofeedback, Horvath said and acknowledged that Walker did his power training, amplitude training, before doing coherence training and got really good results too. So it didn't seem to matter whether the power training was done before or after, but they felt it was an important component of that training. Now with Coburn's protocol, you do both at once. You do the coherence training and the amplitude or power training at the same time. And that makes sense. So one of the other things that Horvath found was that training up coherence tends to decrease phase. So if you're looking at phase in the map and it's something you want to consider, you can, and you can do that in our map system. Phase is always there. We don't show it. And Horvath even says, it's just changes so much. I don't think we have the right take on it yet to really understand it well. And I agree with him and still do. But this is a time where you could use phase to help you make decisions. So training up coherence decreases phase. You might want to see if your phase is low on the coherence that you're training. Training down coherence tends to increase phase. Now, these are not black and white rules. These are tendencies. And normalizing amplitude tends to normalize coherence and phase. So that's why we've mostly stayed with amplitude training, because we have a theoretical perspective that supports the notion and the observation that coherence and phase are adjusted by normalizing amplitude, and we generally let the coherence and phase adjust as an adaptive response, because we see coherence and phase as adaptive responses to changes in amplitude, to changes in the activity that's going on in a region in the cortex. Now, this is all subject to further research and opinion and insight. There's nothing here in stone. This is just what we've learned to date in the field. Now, when you did this kind of coherence training that Horvath was looking at, overtraining he felt was a common pitfall. Now, I looked at his article, and I had talked with him previously too at times, and my take on this has been, and continues to be the more I analyze it, is that in those days people were interpreting changes that were unexpected as overtraining, rather than interpreting it as an adaptive response in one phase of multiple iterations that would eventually lead to normalcy. So the brain would go outside of normal limits in unexpected ways in order to change, to rearrange things. And we've called it reorganization. So I don't really believe that overtraining was a common pitfall. I don't think there's enough support for that statement at this point. I think I have more support in argument against it, because I have massive data that doesn't agree with it. Significant increases in symptomology, yes, I heard that universally across the board, and in all the workshops we were admonished to be aware of that, that you could get a lot of increases in symptomology and significant side effects. Now, one of my concerns about increases in symptomology statements was that these were also people who weren't looking psychodynamically at the individual as they went through neurofeedback, and thinking about the fact that people often become more anxious as they move out of depression. And that was actually known in psychiatry for a long time. It just got buried in the drug literature. And that often people who are integrating trauma have increased symptomology. So there was often a very mechanistic perspective in early neurofeedback by a lot of people who were numbers people, who were just thinking, oh, I just need to change the numbers and I would get a linear response. And that doesn't add up at all, in my opinion, based on any of the research out there to date, or any of the data that I've seen or have. I'd like to see somebody make that case. Okay, significant side effects. Yeah, again, those side effects could be because they're integrating and reorganizing. The side effects were probably because the coherence training was pushing them too fast, and that's akin to training people at T3, T4, without first starting at C3, C4, just going straight to T3, T4 and training them, and getting all these side effects because you're pushing them too fast, because that area is not as regulated thalamicortically, and you have a lot of leverage there. It's a convergence zone between the ascending systems, particularly vagal and the sympathetic system, and and the cortex and the limbic structures. And so it's a real area we've always known, have a very powerful effect on. However, taking all that into account, there did seem to be enough of an intense side effect and symptomology that people were kind of ginger with this implementation, and it didn't really get that much momentum in the field. So this thing that Coburn's doing with efficacy was interesting and exciting. So here are some of the confounds to two-channel coherence training based on Coburn's assessment. The accuracy of the metrics due to inter-electrode distance generated an error rate of 50%. So it is true, the more you change the electrode distance, the more error you get. And that error comes from noise or volume conduction, which can be up to 30% in terms of noise contribution. And then there was the inability to capture and include three-dimensional activity or third source influence. Now, what does he mean like that? A recent editor balked at that concept even. Yeah, you have to read pretty deep in the literature. This was particularly brought up by Pasquale Marquis earlier than anybody I'd heard presented when he was looking at Loretta analysis, and he was saying, you know, you people are working in 2 dimensions in coherence, you need to work in 3. What does that mean? That means he's looking at effective connectivity. And by effective connectivity, he's saying what direction are third-party influencing communication effects, what direction are they taking place in? So you have 2 locations, but those 2 locations are connected to multiple other locations. And those multiple other locations are providing input to those 2 locations. And you don't know what they are. And you don't know whether training there is sending out information or receiving information, and how's that affecting it. Now with 2 channels, that's not much of an issue. But when you start adding 4 channels, now you've got information that you can monitor between all combinations of those locations, and you can also begin to look at the direction of the communication between those locations. So now you've got a much more complex 3-dimensional picture of communication. And Coburn saying we should be taking that into account. There must be a way that we can use that information to train. And of course, she's moving, pulling that information from Nunez in 2006, his book on neurophysics, which we all use as kind of our Bible on neurophysics. So Coburn says 4-channel allows for more comparisons, and the Coburn study compared 2-channel with 4-channel coherence, but not 2-channel amplitude. He used an N of 174, 61 2-channel versus 113 4-channel. The age range was from 4 to 80, 2/3 male. Mean age was 19 years. He compared 3 types of coherence calculations, and he found that he could do 21 sessions of 2 channels, and it resulted in the same changes as 14 sessions of 4-channel. So he felt that that was a significant change. You know, you add 2 more channels and you've got 6 or 7 less sessions, you got similar results. So he's saying this seems to be more effective. So with multivariate coherence training, we're looking at many more variables. Inputs from sensors are transformed into multivariate coherence values across all possible combinations of the 4 locations or sensors. He found this reduces side effects, he gets higher efficiency, and power changes and coherence changes are greater, and they come quicker. And so this is a diagram of this pattern of change. And if you want to know how he's doing, he's looking at all possible combinations and permutations of activity between all 4 locations. And mathematically, this is how you would structure that. It's how you would calculate that. This was called his QPS, coherence protocol. Now, just to be thorough, he compared this with several other possible ways of calculating coherence in the research, which was really a cool thing to do. And he found this is the best way to calculate it. So these calculations allowed us to implement it in our research. and he found it reduced error by 50%. So that brings us to, how did we set it up in our software? Well, this is how we're doing it. And this is not the only way you could do it, but this is where we're starting from. This is a very conservative way to do it. And as people implement it and learn more, because we're taking research that Coburn did and we're implementing it clinically. And so we need to move ahead cautiously and confer with each other as we do. So the first thing you do now when you come to our system, if you've got the latest update, you'll see when you go to set up a session, a training plan, it says neurofeedback type now. And there's a drop-down menu. And on that drop-down menu, you can select coherence. Okay? Once you select coherence, then you can add in the locations that you want to train. So you can go down and select each location. So then you can select 4 locations. I would recommend that you select locations, based upon our knowledge of networks. And we can talk about that more. But by that, I mean, this location, F3, F4, P3, P4, is the executive control network. If you were going to do the salience network, you might want to do something different, like C3, C4, T3, T4, or C3, T3, T4, F3, F4. So we've got a list of them, and we've made them available. And if you want to know more about networks, I've got several presentations on it, and we post those lists quite often. And so you can use those network lists to decide which networks you would like to train. Now you could either just train based upon what the map output says. In other words, our map report will say, these are 4 locations to train, and you could train those locations. Or you could make the decision based anatomically on their symptomology and what networks you think are causing the symptomologies. Now that takes a lot more knowledge, and there may be more room for error there because you're not doing it statistically, but sometimes there's an advantage to making those decisions that way if you're an experienced clinician. The next thing you could do is decide what you wanted to train. So you'd have to look at the brain map. This is meant to be done with a brain map. So you look at the brain map and say, oh, well, the theta coherence is really high, and I want to train that theta coherence down. And you often see that. You have high elevated coherence in theta, and they're having difficulty with emotional management and memory. And so you say, I want to train the coherence in the 4 to 8 or 4 to 7, your choice, band down. So you select the coherence band you want to train down, and then usually you'll select the corresponding amplitude. Well, I want to train 4 to 7 down. So I'm going to train 4 to 7 down, and I'm going to train the coherence down. And now, at the same time, you could say, I'd also like to train 12 to 15 up, and I'm also going to train 20 to 30 down. So in all 4 locations, you'll be training 20 to 30 down and 12 to 15 up. Now, you don't have to do that. You'd say, well, wait a second, I don't want to train 12 to 15 up on both sides. Well, then you just skip that. You just train the 4 to 7 down and train the coherence down, and train any high beta down just to keep muscle tension down. So that's one of the ways that you could approach this. Now, there's not a set perfect way to do this. This is straight off the research, and you're adapting it to applied neuroscience, as Thatcher is fond of saying, and you're on the cutting edge. So you're making up the rules to some degree, you're observing, and hopefully you're moving carefully and conservatively. Okay, so we select the coherence to train, we select component bands to train, and this is the screen that you'll get. You'll get 4 channels of EEG, Make sure you're getting nice, clean EEG. You'll get the filters reported on the left side and the right side, for the left side and right side of the brain. And then on the far left side, you'll get the coherence value. So you can see this is saying right now 65. The coherence here in theta is 65, which is actually quite high. It started out down at 38 or 40, and then within a few minutes, like 4 minutes, it was up to 65. So whoever our subject is for that simulation, their coherence was going up. Sometimes this person looks like they were a meditator based upon what I've been seeing of their EEG over the years. But at any rate, that's a pretty high coherence value for theta. And so you're training that down. And then we've got, your standard measures here to watch and see what's going on, and activation and symmetry, and you'll want to observe those. And that's all there is to it. And you can go over and click on training filters and see what's going on as well. And that's got all of them. And I think here's our training filters. So there's our, still at 18 minutes, we're still up, well, we're even higher at 69%. And you can see the coherence, average coherence is 55%. And here are the theta values. You can see how those change too. Now we aren't training them, so you wouldn't notice, but theta was 7774, 7774. His coherence didn't change much, but remember, we're just following the simulation. We're not actually training somebody here. So you can just look at those values alone if you want to track those values alone. Okay, so that is my presentation on this topic, and I'm going to start unmuting people, and then we can start fielding questions here. And Rob has just started experimenting with it, and we
yeah, and I have written down several questions I am at. Boy, there's a bunch of noisy folk.
Yeah, well, we'll mute that person.
I'll wait till you're unmuted and I'll pose the questions so you don't have to worry
we've got quite a few people here, so.
I know. It may take him about an hour or two to unmute everybody, folks, so just be patient. No, it won't take that long. But
well, we can start accepting comments if anybody has any.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that might be easy while you're unmuting is, will this ever be available through home training?
Not till we've used it pretty widely in the clinic, right?
Okay.
Because we want to.
Oh, I understood. Yep.
Yeah, because we may want to change some things. We want to make it so that you can train amplitude differently between the hemispheres.
Right. And one of the things I noticed, and I never went over it with you the other day, is when you had your slide up, you had delta, and you said don't ever train it up, and you had theta and beta, but there was nothing about alpha. Is alpha coherence something we can train? And if so, would it be up or down or either way?
Okay, so that was not in I wonder, I can't get that one. That was not in Horvath's articles. He tended to apparently avoid training alpha.
Ah, okay. So we don't want to mess with that.
Well,
Honey, I know you're here.
I wouldn't just say don't mess with it. I mean, I would definitely consider down training alpha and alpha coherence with people with busy mind. I mean, I'd do it.
Ah, okay, good.
I would do it carefully, and watch, make sure you're tracking the symptomology, make sure you're not just trying to guess or remember and taking the client's word for it, but make them fill out a symptom tracker. Because again, remember with neurofeedback, generally we can always undo what we've done,
right.
as long as we don't get too far down the road. And so if you get a little bit of a strong effect, you look at it and say, well, did we push him too fast? Was this because we radically changed things, right?
Yeah, well, I was curious about that in particular because I was going over this with Honey, and the map I pulled up, the only coherence that was low was in the alpha range. And I said, so in theory, you could train that up, I guess.
Yeah, just,
All right.
be cautious.
Yeah.
No.
Yep. Now, there's another thing I think people have a question about is your target range is, as always, is defaulted at 75%. So when you're training coherence, you can use that range as well. You could adjust that to make it slightly easier or keep it at 75 or maybe a little harder, depending on how they respond.
Um,
Or would you leave it alone?
in terms of coherence, it's a 75% reinforcement rate. So we're
Right,
not looking at training to a coherence norm, and I would leave it
right.
at that, yes, because
Leave it at that.
regardless of whether it's coherence or amplitude, we've generally found that a 75% reinforcement rate is most
Right.
effective, and we've done coherence training in the past, um, and that seems to be a pretty good rate. Now, you might find it slightly better to go more gently and train at an 80% reinforcement rate. I mean, I know you begin at 85, Rob.
I do.
Yeah, so if you're doing something that's a little different, like training alpha coherence down, or train, you might want to start with 80, 85% just to go gently on
Okay.
them. Because remember,
Okay.
this coherence training, theoretically, based on the research we've seen, provides you with more leverage. And you can push people
Right.
pretty fast, so I would say. Now,
Okay. And
I'm open to
I
other
have one.
opinions on that for people who have done this training already on different equipment like EEG or have done coherence training with Z-score and have other opinions. I mean, again, coherence is
We're
still a pretty controversial thing still.
right. So we're still learning about this, and therefore my last question, because I'm sure there'll be others, but I think these were some ones that just came up to me as you were talking. The coherence values range. So on your slide there, it says coherence 4 to 8. The range is, the value is 55.7. Is there a range we would be looking at, or do we just not know?
In terms of what's to be expected for coherence training,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I would imagine, and I'm not sure, you could go um, to the 2D heads and you could see if they were moving into a normative range. In other words, that should show up.
Okay.
So you could switch over and say, oh, okay, we're pretty steady at 65. It's not looking too normal, and wait till it got into a normal range. So you could do
That makes
Z
sense.
monitoring with it. That's something you can't do with Coburn's G, or that
Right.
you can do with our system. This way, we're not trying to tell the brain what Z-score or contain it, because coherence is much more active than power, and you want to give the brain a lot of latitude to shift as needed because it's an adaptive response. So I wouldn't try to contain it too much, but by 75, 80% reinforcement rate, you're going at a pretty good standard rate, and you could flip over and see by getting into the standard range of coherence that I need to be in.
Hey, Rob, were
Perfect.
you referring to that number like when Richard said 65 was a little high, like what the range was in that regard?
Oh, I was looking, no, if you look at the screen, honey, the screen right now under the training filters, the very top one says coherence, and then that rate is 55.77. What I'm gathering from what Richard said is that's going to vary. There's no set range that's going to fit for every individual. And by
Mm-hmm.
going to the 2D heads and watching
Mm-hmm.
how things may be normalized, then you would get a sense for that individual client or patient what that range would be for that value.
So there's not like a range like it.
No, it's not like asymmetry or the activation scores that the numbers on the
Uh-huh.
bottom of the screen, which we've been looking at, we've
Right.
been looked at Monday night, or the actual values for your traditional bands like 4 to 7. We know what the averages are for magnitudes. With coherence, I think we have to just pay a little more attention and watch what's going on and talk with the patient, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, and generally we should be seeing the EEG distribution normalize. So these asymmetry patterns and activations should normalize. But if you're pushing somebody really fast and they're reorganizing, you might see some shifts
Hmm.
in these symmetries, which are more pronounced at the beginning, but then smooth out. I mean, again, we're monitoring, we're doing this QPS protocol, but we have more information to bear on it than is in the research article by Coburn. So Coburn's not reporting on the values that we have access to here.
Right.
And
No,
so
I guess I
you
was
have access
curious.
to those.
Thank you. I guess I was curious because you mentioned that 65 was a little high, so I don't know what the relative range might be.
Well, I just happen to know that that's a relatively high range for theta coherence off the top of my head.
Oh, okay, I got it. Thank you.
I don't have, I'm not sitting here looking at a chart or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
When you start getting up into 70 and 80% range in coherence on delta and theta and alpha, you're getting up pretty high. And I just happen to know that because for a decade I've been running norms, and after a while you notice patterns.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I would not expect a clinician or anybody else to know that, because y'all are not sitting around running norms statistically day and night. I have computers, thousands of Excel files filled with them, and Martin asked me to go look something up, and it's like, okay, this is going to be an all-day expedition.
Fishing trip. So if it gets that high, is it something we're supposed to do, or are we just supposed to, note that?
I would note it, because this is going to be a learning experience for you.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I would make, as you do this as clinicians, make notes of it, talk about it, share it, because this is another world. We've been doing that with power training. Well, now we've got what's supposed to be a pretty safe way, an effective way to train coherence without using z-scores, which I really love that Coburn did that. And he's doing it from a multivariate perspective that's well grounded in the neuroimaging research. So, I mean, this is kind of cool. So we have an opportunity to explore it side by side. He'll continue to do it with his equipment and his research, but we can add to that, bin of knowledge by, doing it ourselves and watching numbers and sharing with each other.
Richard, question about that. Real quickly, wouldn't the auto function kind of take care of that, because it's going to keep it wherever it needs to be, as far as like not really having to worry about the specific number? As long as you got the auto function on, it's going to fluctuate.
Yes, it's going to keep training. It's going to keep it, the reinforcement rate constant, and keep training it down. Yeah, it will. And you'll see that. I mean, you'll be able to see. Here's the coherence trend is, on the screen here, right there. So you'll be able to watch that coherence trend, and see how it changes.
I have a question. So how many minutes? Is it still 30 minutes? Because I think with Dr. Coburn, he suggests like no more than 12 minutes. Is that different using the 2-channel?
That's great bringing up that point. Thank you for bringing up that point. Yeah, I would only do it for 15 minutes max, and you may even find that's too much. It's not the same as magnitude training, but training with a video screen will be different than training with a game, and that will be different than training with just having them watch the coherence thermo there and trying to get that down, or just listening to a tone. So each of those modalities has different requirements in terms of time, and I don't think we'll know that till people try it. But again, I'd say be conservative. Start off 10 or 15 minutes and see what happens. This is a powerful tool, and I don't think you just want to slam people with it. You want to go gently with it, and we're going to learn. This is part of being on the cutting edge, right? We don't have extensive knowledge. We're learning, so we want to go carefully.
So I just started doing the 4-channel multivariate training using Brainmaster, and what I'm seeing here with the 2-channel, this looks better. when I say better, there is definitely a lot of components involved with, you're definitely managing, doing the manual thresholding. And so it looks like here it's on auto.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't have to manage that. So that's a good thing. And then the other thing is what you said at the beginning. When do you decide it's coherent? Because I know amplitude, and then you start working on the percentages and within the networks. I mean, when do you start tapping into that higher level of thinking to say, you know what, maybe this isn't amplitude, maybe we should just switch to coherence? When do you start thinking in that direction?
Yeah, Veronica, my response would be I would pull this out when I had somebody really stuck, and that's where I would use it, because the 2-channel is, for a lot of people, already faster than they can handle sometimes, and you get side effects. But if you have somebody stuck, that's when I would bring this in and utilize it at that point. And you don't know, there's no way to know how much of this training is coherence and how much of it's amplitude unless you did coherence alone, which you could do by just making the amplitude so easy that you weren't really training it. But then you'd be outside the paradigm, which Coburn feels that it's important to train amplitude at the same time.
Richard, can I quickly interject a question about trying to define coherence?
Yeah.
I've asked this question before, and I'm a little slow learner.
Sure.
So from what you've said, it's some combination of connectivity and magnitude and so, yeah, if you can just try and help me consolidate this concept in my mind so that
it's kind of tough to do if you're not a mathematician and you haven't looked at the equations. What we're using is called the Welsh method of coherence calculation. It's pretty standard. Thought Tech uses it. We use it. It's the standard calculation used at most of the scientific sites too, which the researchers use. So, and that's why we chose it. And I think it's even the same one Thatcher uses. I'd have to double check, but I believe it is. At any rate, that particular calculation method is the one we use, and we're calculating both magnitude and phase, and we're looking at the Pearson product moment correlation of those. So usually when I say Pearson product moment correlation, people glaze over if they're a clinician, and they're not really able to follow it much farther than that. So how deep did you want to go into it? I don't know if we have too much time, but we can.
I mean, that's helpful because phase has always been something that phased me. Because again, Thatcher has a complicated phase lag conceptualization of how the different parts turn on and off.
Yes, he's got the 2-compartmental model, and it's really not that complicated conceptually. Mathematically, it is, but and that's beyond the scope of what we're doing here. And if you wanted to know that, you should go look up my presentation on coherence. I believe I talk about phase lock and phase leading, phase lag, phase locking, and those are terms that we use to describe when particular 2 locations or more are communicating with each other. And so that's generally how we look at it.
And that's on YouTube, Richard?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
On YouTube it goes up there, and we look at that.
Okay, thank you. Right. I'll let other people ask questions because I know the time's moving along. things. Thank you.
How many times per week are you, I mean, can they do it 3 times per week, twice a week,
Again,
every day?
I would start out with twice a week, just like with standard neurofeedback, so I had something to compare it to. I trained this person twice a week. I wasn't making progress. Let me do twice a week with this person on coherence. I'm going to start out with, shorter session and see how it affects them, and then I might increase the session length, trying to determine that. So that.
And so when you repeat a map, where on the map are you looking at? Are you looking at the connectivity part of the map to kind of do a pre and post?
Yes. Yes. The map, our map system says connectivity because, and we don't say coherence, because there's different kinds of connectivity, and we're trying to keep things standardized. So we're talking about, connectivity rather than coherence, because some people, they think of coherence, they think immediately of one version or another. But connectivity could also not be, I mean, we're looking at the cross correlation coefficient in the frequency domain. If you look at the amplitude or magnitude, you could do the cross correlation coefficient in that domain, and then you would have something that Kaiser Sturman look at. So they're looking at connectivity using a different type of calculation in the amplitude range. But it's still a measure of connectivity, and it's valid, and they've used it and published it, and it's very valid. And Kaiser has come up with other measures of connectivity. I mean, the ones that we use, the 5 neurometric dimensions we use, are not the only ones. There's lots of other possible ones, and there may be better ones down the road. And David Kaiser was exploring them, and he felt like, for instance, that unity was one of the best and most accurate measures, and he's the only one who's ever used it for the most part that I know of. But down the road, I hope to also investigate that particular measurement. But we've got an agenda we have to follow at a conservative rate.
I think a good example would be, isn't it Thatcher's system that has coherence or connectivity measures not only between interhemispherically, but F3 to C3 or whatever.
Yeah. There's a lot of connectivity that's presented for which there are no pathways, and Kaiser brings up that point too and says, how much credence should we give to pathways, activity in pathways for which there are no connections between, clear, direct connections that you can see in the image. Right. But that doesn't mean they aren't connected indirectly. I mean, because the brain is a system, so you can train one area and it will affect another, and there may be some relationship, but it may not be because they're talking directly, but because they're talking indirectly. I mean, these are things that we really don't know yet.
Right. Well, it would seem to me, because I know we're at the top of the hour, that for those of you that are going to start to work with this, the takeaway message I would give you is go cautiously, look at what we've discussed, and one of the best things to look at how you're doing with it is to sit down with your patient or your client and ask them, as you begin to work with it, what are they noticing? Are they feeling better? Are they noticing differences in a positive way?
Great presentation. Thank you, Dr. Suter.
Rob,
welcome.
Yes.
When you run this, or what feedback tones are you using with coherence or the other spectrums? Is there just one tone, or are you having 4 tones?
Good question, Richard. We didn't discuss that. I'll let Richard discuss answer that for you. Great question.
I would be using myself. I would be using the video to do it component, and it's getting dark and light. You could use music, soft and loud. You could use a tone as well, but it would be responding to all of these factors at the same time.
So eyes open, video more so than games, eyes closed, maybe some music with the audio variation versus just a tone.
Yeah.
And you have threshold when all 4 conditions are met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Richard. That was great. That was good stuff. And
Very good. Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to playing with this new feature with the software.
Yes, and also I know we have to go. Just please feel free to contact me directly if you see anything that you have a further question on, or it's something that you think would help improve it, or if you find anything amiss because it's brand new. We believe all the bugs are out. We beta tested it, but we got to see. You never know. Sometimes things pop up unexpectedly. So we're very open feedback on this. I appreciate anybody's interest, and good luck.
Yep. Okay, everybody. We'll see you Friday. It'll be the 1st of May. May Day, I guess. I don't know. Everybody take care.
See you Friday.
Bye.